Hello, and welcome to today's event on advancing treatments, the latest in pancreatic cancer clinical research. My name is Julie Fleshman. I'm president and CEO of the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, fondly known as PanCAN, and I'm so thrilled you've joined us today. November is Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Month, and today is World Pancreatic Cancer Day. So I hope you're all out there wearing purple like me and spreading the word about PanCAN and all of the amazing things that you make possible. I want to take a moment and thank our webinar sponsors today, AstraZeneca and Ipsen. We're so grateful for your support. I also want to thank and acknowledge our scientific and medical affairs industry partners, AbbVie, AstraZeneca, Ipsen, Pfizer, Raphael Pharmaceuticals, Tempus, Trisalis, and Time. Again, grateful for the support that you provide to many of our scientific and medical affairs initiatives. A special thank you to our donors, our supporters, and volunteers who are joining us today. Nothing that we do and nothing that we talk about today would be possible without you. So PanCAN has a comprehensive approach to fighting pancreatic cancer. We fund research and clinical initiatives. In fact, this year alone, PanCAN will invest $23 million in research. And that includes our competitive research grants program, our Know Your Tumor service, our health data platform called Spark, Precision Promise, a clinical trial that we've just launched, and the early detection initiative. So we're really funding things across the entire spectrum of pancreatic cancer research. We also do a lot of government affairs and advocacy work. So we're in Washington, D.C., advocating for increased federal resources for pancreatic cancer researchers all across the country. And an example of something recently that we worked on was advocating with our congressional champions to create a brand new pancreatic cancer research program at the Department of Defense. Those are new research dollars now that pancreatic cancer researchers all across the country can apply for. Then we have our amazing patient services program. I really feel like it's the foundation of what PanCAN does. We have a call center with trained case managers, and patients and families can call in and get one-to-one individualized support, information, and resources about their particular needs. From things like looking for a specialist in your geographic region, to finding a clinical trial that might be right for you, to getting information about diet and nutrition. And I really encourage our viewers today to use our patient services program if that's appropriate. And finally, our community engagement. We have an amazing volunteer, grassroots, and supporters all across the country that are helping us to raise awareness and visibility about the disease, and also to help us raise funds so that we can provide all of these amazing programs and services. So I'm thrilled to introduce today's panelists, Lynn Matrisian, PanCAN's Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Andrew Hindafar, an oncologist and the Medical Director of Pancreatic Cancer at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, and finally, Dr. Thomas George, also an oncologist and the Director of the GI Oncology Program at the University of Florida Health Cancer Center. So thrilled to have the three of you with us today. Thank you for being here. So let's start, thinking about the big picture and thinking about the field. The reality is, although we need to still make a lot of advances in creating new treatment options for patients, the field really has come a long way in the last 20 years. So Lynn, one of PanCAN's goals has been to build the field and increase the number of pancreatic cancer researchers that are focused on this disease. So talk a little bit about how that has changed over the last 20 years.
Sure, and hi everybody. So Julie, if we think back to 1999 when PanCAN started, we could find about 30 researchers across the United States that had a government grant that was focused on pancreatic cancer. If we look at that today, about 20 years later, there's more than 330 individuals across the United States with a grant focused on pancreatic cancer. That is a remarkable change. And it's that kind of interest in the disease, studying the disease, that will really help us make the kind of advances that we want to see.
Yeah, it really is incredible how much growth the field has seen. So, Lynn, PanCAN has done a lot of work reviewing the clinical trial landscape. Can you provide us with an overview of how that landscape has really changed, especially over the last 5 years, based on the increased understanding of how best to treat this disease?
Sure, you know that we keep a comprehensive database of the pancreatic cancer clinical trials open across the United States because we believe that clinical trials should be considered at every treatment decision. So our patient central associates have that updated information at their fingertips that they can provide to someone who contacts Patient Central. So we use that database then every couple years to look at any changes in the trends that are happening in pancreatic cancer in clinical research. So I want to make 3 points about kind of things that we observed recently about that. One is that there are more than 150 clinical trials for pancreatic cancer patients open in the United States at any one time. The majority of those are for pancreatic adenocarcinoma, the most common form of the disease, but there are trials also for the neuroendocrine form of the disease, as well as some trials for those with pancreatic cysts. So there's a lot of clinical research that's going on. Another point that we observed was that there's now a remarkable increase in the number of clinical trials that are designed for individuals looking for their second treatment or their third treatment or further. And that was not true 5-10 years ago. It was much more uncommon to find those kind of trials. And there's been a remarkable increase in that. So that shows that we really are making advances in the number, the kinds of therapies that we can offer to patients. And then the third point I'll make is that we also see a remarkable increase in clinical trials over the last couple years for cancer immunotherapy. So immunotherapy is a way of using your own immune defenses to fight the cancer. And there have been advances in other diseases, and now we're applying those advances in other cancer types to pancreatic cancer. So that's been a really remarkable shift over the last few years as well.
Great. Yeah, that was a nice overview of some of the changes that we've seen. So, Dr. George, as an oncologist treating pancreatic cancer patients, how has your role as a clinician really changed over the last 5 years because of some of these advances?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. As an oncologist, I've always enjoyed being able to help patients as part of this larger team of specialists who really kind of focus their experience and energies on pancreatic cancer. And this includes surgeons and gastroenterologists, radiologists, everyone who does this day in and day out. And that teamwork has been critical, I think, to really optimizing patient care and ensuring that we can bring the best outcomes to patients. But what's been exciting, as Lynn alluded to, is that many new treatment options that clinical research has brought forward for patients with pancreatic cancer, either through clinical trials or because of clinical trials that are now FDA approved and are widely available, are related to the personalized approach in cancer care and cancer care delivery. So my role has changed now because one of the challenges that these new treatments have brought to bear is that they're highly selective. And they're beneficial for a group of patients whose cancers or who themselves have a certain biologic feature or a genetic anomaly that makes the therapies highly effective for them. So part of my role now, a large part of my role, is to ensure that that we've thoroughly interrogated every single patient and their cancer for these specific features. And this is true whether they were diagnosed at some time in the past, at some other location, or if they've even received treatments in the past. I really now need to be sure that we're not missing an opportunity to better tailor the treatment options for patients, either through a clinical trial or something that is now standard of care because of a previous clinical trial.
So, Dr. Hindafar, sort of the same question, but from the patient's perspective, how do you think the journey has changed over the last 5 years? You know, there are many more sort of treatment options now for you to be thinking about when a patient walks into your office.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. I think the treatment options have changed quite a bit over the last 5 years, and definitely the approach that the treatment team is taking is much different. About 5 years ago, patients would be treated pretty uniformly across the board. But now with more information and more knowledge, we're treating patients as individuals, and we're introducing personalized medicine into the treatment plan. And personalized medicine is really a shift away from one size fits all treatment. And we do that by looking at two pieces of information. One is that we need to profile the patient's tumor. And two, we need to interrogate the patient's own DNA in their blood, the genes that they inherited from their parents. And with these two pieces of information, we can start to decipher whether or not there are specific treatment options available for our patients. Now, this allows us an opportunity to approve medications and to give treatments that are only effective for small groups of patients. And a great example of this is the recent approval of olaparib, which is for patients with germline BRCA mutations.
Great, thanks. So you've all really alluded to some of the, new treatment advances that we're really focusing on right now. So let's sort of dig into those. Lynn, the way the tumor gets its energy to live is known as metabolism, and that seems to be different in pancreatic cancer. So what is different about metabolism in pancreatic cancer cells, and how do we use that information then to create treatments for the disease?
Yep, you're right, Julie. There's a lot of interest and research that's happening in understanding cancer metabolism. So let's think first about how a normal cell gets the energy it needs to live. So it gets it from the oxygen that we breathe, from the air that we breathe, and particularly the oxygen, and the nutrients that come out of the food that we eat. And a cell can use that oxygen and those nutrients, and it breaks it down into all its little pieces, including energy. And then it uses that energy when it needs to make another cell to replace itself, or it needs to repair something. It uses those energies and those small building blocks to build another cell. So that is a very efficient, but a very slow process. And it happens all the time. And our cells are kind of constantly repairing and generating this energy. So then comes along, in the case of pancreatic cancer, the KRAS oncogene. And it steps on the accelerator, and that cell starts growing like crazy and needs to make all these new proteins and DNA and everything it needs to make another cell. But at the same time, it builds up this stroma that we hear about, this dense scar tissue around it. And that's really preventing the blood vessels from getting in there. So it's not getting enough oxygen and it's not getting enough nutrients. So the cancer cell has to go into emergency mode. And it has to say, oh my goodness, what do I do now? And we have built into our cells emergency pathways. These are evolutionary pathways that we have in these kinds of conditions. So the cancer cell turns to those pathways and uses totally different ways of generating energy without quite so much oxygen. It has ways of, in essence, self-cannibalizing, making itself smaller so that it can use some of those nutrients that it's lacking. And so all these emergency pathways that get turned on. Well, now that we understand what they are, there are the pharmaceutical companies, the researchers are making drugs that will block off, that will prevent those emergency pathways from working. So here's a brand new therapeutic opportunity, new drugs that are being developed that will stop those emergency pathways. And if the cell doesn't have those emergency pathways, it really has no choice but to die. And that's what we want those pancreatic cancer cells to do.
Great, thanks, Lynn. That's really interesting. So, Dr. Hindafar, you talked a little bit about this. Another area that there's a lot of interest is targeted therapies. So we've learned a lot more about this, targeted therapies in the last 5 years and how targeted therapies might help our patients. Can you explain what is a targeted therapy?
Well, absolutely. Happy to explain this. So a targeted therapy means that we will treat our patient who comes into the clinic based on not just where their tumor is from, which is going to be the pancreas, but what kind of molecular characteristics the tumor has and what genetic characteristics the patient has. We bring that information together and we're able to oftentimes deliver each patient a unique therapy based on that information. Now, what does that mean for the patient? Well, it means that you're going to get a couple more tests. So when you go see your doctor who's a pancreas cancer doctor, expect you're going to have your tumor profiled and you're going to get a blood test to check your genes out to see if you have a predisposing gene to develop the cancer or any other gene that can predict therapy effectiveness. And then you go from there, and you can see from the slide that I'll be showing that different patients will have different, will go into different groups. Now, what's happened, and I think next I'll talk about the Know Your Tumor initiative, is, a few years ago, we didn't really know how effective this approach was for pancreas cancer. We didn't know what we were going to do or if it was going to happen. And PanCAN helped launch the Know Your Tumor initiative. And I remember a lot of people were naysaying. They said, this is not going to work. You're wasting your time. But nobody listened. We did it anyways. We then took thousands of patients. PanCAN paid for it. And we molecularly profiled their tumors. And what we found is very interesting is that we found more than expected patients would actually have an actionable alteration, meaning that by sequencing their tumor, we were able to find something that we could use to put them in a distinct group and give them a different type of therapy. So 26%, that was higher than we expected, to be honest. And in patients who had actionable alterations and eventually were able to get a targeted therapy, their outcomes were way better, much better than expected. So we were very excited by this. I believe that this type of efforts kind of, got everyone together on board and saying that, this is something that we have to do for our patients. And now, surprisingly, a few years later, it's become standard of care. Dr. Fleshman has worked very hard on this project, and he's been able to publish this in great journal articles, and this information is disseminated about. So, I think it's coming to your local practice right now, and most of the people on this call who are patients have had their tumors profiled.
Great, thanks, Dr. Hindafar. And of course, if people are interested in PanCAN's Know Your Tumor service, you can call our patient services program and learn more about it, or just learn more about the testing that Dr. Hindafar is talking about to find out if targeted therapies are right for you. So, Dr. George, immunotherapy, this is another area we hear lots about. First, can you just explain what is an immunotherapy?
Absolutely. So immunotherapy is one of those major areas I think of hope and promise for pancreatic cancer and the entire field of oncology to begin with. Immunotherapy are treatments that allow your own immune system to recognize, find, kill the cancer on your behalf. And it's an absolutely fantastic cancer fighting strategy. I actually consider it to be the holy grail of oncology, because all we really have to do is get the immune system started, and then it can kind of take over from there and do all the work that's necessary. Now, when we talk about immunotherapy treatments in cancer care and in cancer research, we're really talking about more than just maintaining a healthy immune system. Don't get me wrong, maintaining a healthy immune system is hard enough to do. And especially as our immune systems get a little older or a little more tired, we all get a little tired and a little older, so it's normal. But when we talk about immunotherapy for cancer care and research, we're really talking about using medications or other interventions that allow the immune system to do something that it's unable to do without us helping it, and that is to really find and attack the cancer. So over our lifetimes, our immune systems protect us. They protect us and heal us from attacks outside our bodies, like infections, and inside our bodies, like early development of cancer. But as the cancer tries to establish itself and gain a foothold, it uses different strategies to avoid being seen by the immune system. And some of these tactics can involve distraction or decoy mechanisms. It can involve blocking the immune system by making the immune system lazy or uninterested in the cancer. And sometimes the cancer itself can just hide itself with the equivalent of a biologic invisibility cloak. So in the cartoon on the slide that we're showing, which for complete disclosure and transparency, my daughter helped develop and ultimately approved. So I have to give credit where credit is due. The cluster of blue cancer cells in the middle on the left is the tumor. And our immune system cells, the little white and purple happy faces dancing around, are wandering around on active duty like they're supposed to do. However, they're essentially ignoring the cancer because of these immune system avoidance tactics that the cancer deploys. So in situations where the immune system is already trying to attack the cancer, but it's just being held at arm's length, these new immunotherapies that are FDA approved for cancer can remove that last block and allow the immune cells that are already trying to get in there to actually be able to do so, to get in there, recognize their target, call in for reinforcements, and destroy the cancer, which is shown on the right of the cartoon. So most of the FDA-approved immunotherapies currently available today against many cancers allow our immune systems to attack the cancer, but importantly, only if they're already trying to engage the cancer without our help. We're simply just removing that final barrier, and that's where we are today with immunotherapies.
And so what needs to be done to make immunotherapy effective for pancreatic cancer?
That's the $64,000 question. That unlike in other cancers that have seen a lot of benefits to date with these FDA-approved therapies, we've not been as successful yet, and I emphasize yet, with pancreatic cancer. So, essentially, each of the FDA-approved cancer therapies today with immunotreatments have been tested in pancreatic cancer, but by themselves effectively show no degree of benefit for patients, and that's unfortunate. But in those clinical trials, we've generated a lot of information and a lot of data that's led us to better understand why that is and why these immunotherapies don't work. And it really just boils down to the fact that pancreatic cancer does an insanely good job of hiding from the immune system. It's like the master stealth ninja. It's able to be there. The immune system essentially is just given up, even looking for it. It's just not even trying. So if we're going to see success with immunotherapy in the future against pancreatic cancer, it's really going to require that we do something to jumpstart the immune system and get it to pay attention again, because it's given up. So most current immunotherapies aren't capable of really doing that. So this is why clinical research is so important. To test new combinations of immunotherapies, new ways of activating or getting the immune system to pay attention again. And I think personally, the promising future direction for immunotherapy in pancreatic cancer is going to really require a combination approach. We've seen that immunotherapies by themselves has not worked, and the cancer's gotten a head start. The immune system needs time to wake up. We got to get up and get coffee and take a shower and get ourselves going before we can go to work. The immune system's the same way. So we have to level the playing field, perhaps by using chemotherapy to hold the cancer in check while we let the immune system kick in, or some other intervention. And so really, as far as immunotherapeutic strategies for pancreatic cancer in the future go, it's going to need to be immunotherapy plus something else, plus chemo, plus radiation, vaccines, novel other ways of getting the immune system to wake up and get in the game. Because right now, the immunotherapies by themselves are just not clearly potent enough to handle pancreatic cancer. This cancer is uniquely different.
Great. And so, of course, the only way for us to test some of those combinations that you're talking about and some of the other treatment approaches that we've discussed is through clinical trials. Clinical trials are essential for developing new treatment approaches. PanCAN strongly recommends that patients consider clinical trials at diagnosis and throughout their journey. So, Dr. Hendifar, can you talk a little bit about why clinical trials are so important?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and clinical trials are the bedrock of new information gathering and new treatment development for pancreatic cancer patients and for all cancer patients. I mean, without clinical trials, we can't make the advances that are necessary. And, there are a lot of misconceptions about clinical trials and things that people are concerned about. And people should be concerned. I'm not going to say you should just jump in any clinical trial at any time, but let's address some of the issues or conceptions. One is my patients often say is, I don't want to be a guinea pig. And although, guinea pigs are adorable and I love them to death, but no, we do not treat people like guinea pigs. When you're on a clinical trial, you get the best treatment available. You get the best standard of care available. And these treatments have been tested in other models, in animal models, in cell lines, and all types of things to make sure that they're going to be helpful before we go ahead and test them in humans. Some people say, well, for me, clinical trials are okay, but I haven't run out of all trial options. I'm not ready for a clinical trial yet. The truth is, a lot of times you try to study new medications sooner rather than later because the benefit might happen, or sometimes new treatments can help the therapies you're already getting. So clinical trials are for all lines of therapy. Some of my patients say, oh, I want to participate in a clinical trial, but I might get a placebo. Well, you might get a placebo, but if you get a placebo, you'll always get the best standard of care. So you're never going to put yourself at a disadvantage there. And finally, some people think, well, clinical trials are great, but they're just not for me. It's not important that I participate. Unfortunately, in pancreas cancer, we don't have enough patients participating in clinical trials. So it is very important. And it's not the patient's fault. A lot of times the doctors don't have them, but it's really important that both the providers and the patients, we all get together and support clinical research as much as possible.
Great. So I think some people get confused about what's the difference between a phase 1, a phase 2, and a phase 3 clinical trial. Can you just briefly tell us what's the difference in those phases?
Absolutely. It's confusing. So phase 1 is what's called a safety and tolerability study. So they're basically wanting to make sure that the medication you're receiving is safe and what's the optimal dose. So a few patients will get enrolled a few at a time. They'll get that dose. If it's safe, they'll go to the next one until they find the safe dose. At that point, the study usually stops. And then you move on to a phase 2 study. Phase 2 is to kind of see, is this medicine working? And it's usually a one group of patients that's larger than a phase 1, maybe about 50 to 100, sometimes more patients. Sometimes randomized, sometimes you get a different therapy to compare it to, sometimes not. And that trial is important because you determine, is this drug effective? Is it working? Compared to other people in the same situation, are these groups of patients doing better? And then finally, we get to the phase 3 trial. This is a very important trial because it usually leads to registration of the medication with the FDA if it's positive. These trials are the ones that are always randomized. They're sometimes blinded and sometimes placebo controlled. And what those things mean is blinded means is that sometimes you're not going to know which treatment exactly you're going to get. And placebo controlled means, sometimes you'll get a placebo, but in all cases, you'll get the best standard treatment known. So that's always a guarantee. And phase 3 trials are very important because that's the last step before drug approval.
Great. That was a great explanation. So, Dr. George, besides having these different phases, there's also different types of clinical trials. The traditional clinical trial, I think, is what people are most familiar with when some patients on the clinical trial get the current standard of care, as Dr. Hindefar was talking about, and others get the new investigational treatment. And then the researchers are trying to determine which one is better. But there are actually some newer clinical trial designs that the FDA has been very supportive of to test new treatments. And PanCAN recently launched one of these clinical trials that uses an adaptive clinical trial design called Precision Promise. As I mentioned earlier, you're one of the investigators enrolling patients on Precision Promise. Can you tell us a little bit about Precision Promise?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, Precision Promise is a clinical trial. It's specifically for patients with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And as a clinical trial, it does require patients to meet certain eligibility requirements, and it's only available at certain centers because there are strict supervision requirements for the trial. But that said, this is one of the most innovative and cutting edge trial designs for patients that I've ever seen, especially in pancreatic cancer. As far as I know, this is the first trial in pancreatic cancer that takes advantage of 2 different features at the same time. It is a platform trial. And so what that means is that it is a single study that allows us to test multiple different questions or treatments simultaneously. And so we can ask lots of different questions at the same time. Patients can have access to multiple different treatments over the course of their cancer treatment. And so if one treatment's not working, we can understand that quickly, move on to plan B for the patient's benefit, and all within the context of one clinical trial. As new ideas are brought forward and need to be tested, they're ready for testing. As Dr. Hendafar mentions, as that safe dose has been established, they can be added to this trial in an efficient manner, because we don't have to rewrite a whole new study and reopen that study. So patients can gain access to it very, very quickly by simply popping on an extra treatment within the trial. And the entire platform trial is FDA registration enabled. There's a lot of fancy words there, but basically what that boils down to is the fact that if the treatment proves to be successful, it can automatically right then and there undergo FDA approval or review for FDA approval. So this benefits patients not even on the Precision Promise trial, because the sooner we can get an FDA approval for a new treatment, it then becomes a de facto standard of care for patients who never had the opportunity to participate in this, which honestly is the whole goal, right? To be able to answer questions quickly, get new treatments out to patients as fast as possible. So that second real innovation is this adaptation. And this is really where the speed comes in, because this innovative component allows the statisticians on the trial to learn as we go. And this is basically not waiting until the end of the study to know if what we did worked. The statisticians are actually able to tell that in real time. So this is set up so behind the scenes, not to the docs, not to the patients, the statisticians are analyzing the data for every single patient that's on the trial. And as treatments look to be working, more patients are offered those treatments as they subsequently come into the trial. And so that accelerates, it hits the gas pedal for these treatments that are showing promise to hurry up and get an answer and to know once and for all and verify whether in fact they are working the way they're supposed to. So it gets us to the answer faster, gives more patients an earlier chance to benefit from those treatments along their way, and hopefully make new treatments available to patients as fast as possible. It really all boils down to urgency, and that's really kind of baked into the fabric of this trial.
And so for a patient that wants to enroll in Precision Promise, how is the design different? What does all of that mean for the patient enrolling?
Yeah, thanks. So, besides this innovative platform and adaptive design that I briefly mentioned, Precision Promise is specifically for patients who have stage 4 or metastatic pancreatic cancer, but uniquely, it allows patients to enter the trial at different time points in their cancer journey. So they can either enter at the very beginning of them being found to have stage 4 cancer, or later after they've already received some treatment for their pancreatic cancer. So this is very different from other trials, which are very rigid in that there's a certain window of opportunity for them to participate. And when patients enter the trial, they have access to any standard treatment that they didn't previously have, plus they have access to experimental treatments, or what's considered investigational treatments. And so like traditional trials, when the patient comes into the trial, they do get a computer assignment or randomization to a certain treatment, but that's being driven behind the scenes by the statisticians, who again are looking in real time and trying to offer more effective therapies to more patients as soon as it looks like that's the right thing to consider doing. What's also different about this trial compared to others is that if a patient enters the study at the beginning of their cancer journey with stage 4 disease, and if the treatment they receive is not necessarily working for them, they can remain in the trial and get another shot at another treatment in the trial. So there's multiple opportunities for patients to remain involved in the trial and remain involved with getting access to new therapies. And lastly, the last feature of this trial that I know both Dr. Hendafar and I really appreciate is that all the patients in this trial receive what I consider to be the bells and whistles that go into ensuring that a patient's care is optimal. This includes, maximizing and optimizing their supportive care services, getting the comprehensive molecular profiling of their cancer, which he's previously mentioned, nutritional support, including digestive enzymes and assessments of their activity levels and their sleep patterns. Each of these is critical to making sure that patients stay as healthy as possible during the treatments and hopefully well beyond that time period as well.
Great, thanks so much. That was a great explanation. And I think, just PanCAN's so proud to sponsor this groundbreaking trial. And it's thanks to our donors that are allowing us to really be able to fund this and make it possible for patients. So Lynn, besides funding clinical research, we believe a really important role that PanCAN plays is ensuring that patients understand their treatment options and can make informed decisions about their care. So can you tell us a little bit about our patient services and what tools are available to patients?
PanCAN has had direct one-on-one patient support since the early days, since about 2002. And we have just amazing patient central case managers. They are well-trained, they're really good listeners, and they can just take a whole range of questions and do the research if needed to help answer those questions. So they're really, just really quite amazing. And they use kind of a framework. So when someone calls them facing pancreatic cancer, they use a framework that we call the right track. And what that means is they want to make sure that that individual has the right team, that they have the right individuals on their team to help them with that support, that they're getting the right tests. And we heard earlier about the need to have molecular profiling as well as germline testing. So get the right tests, and then get the right treatments, and then share your data. And so within the right treatments is where the clinical trials come in, and where we use that clinical trial database that I talked about earlier. And we can look for, let's see, last year, Patient Central ran about over 14,000 clinical trial searches in the year. So that's a lot of helping individuals. And what happens is then they'll look for trials based on the stage of disease, based on geographic, the distance from where that person lives, how far they're willing to travel. And they'll generate a list of clinical trials that individual can take to their physician and say, you know, let's look at this together. Let's consider what's the best option for me. And so they'll make that decision together. So it's really a whole range of services that we offer. And we can help individuals with just a whole variety of questions anywhere along, and make sure they get on the right track.
Terrific. And we hope that our viewers will, call our call center and utilize this amazing service. So, all right, everybody, a sort of final question here. What's the area of clinical research that you're just most excited about for the future? Lynn, let's start with you.
Well, I have to say I'm really excited about what's happening in the early detection realm. And there's a couple things that get me really excited about that. And one is that there's some new tests that are on the horizon, not there yet, but that I think really have a lot of promise. And some of them are tests for multiple cancers, not just pancreatic cancer. And some are for pancreatic cancer specifically. So these are blood tests that are not available yet, but I'm keeping my eye on them. And I think there's really some exciting things that are coming in the not too distant future. So I'm excited about that. The second thing I'm excited about is we're getting a much better sense of who's at higher risk and who should be getting these tests on a regular basis. And there's a couple things in that area. One is Dr. Hendefar talked about the need to have testing of in essence, the germline, all the DNA in all of your cells to look for alterations that are important for both treatment, but as well as important for understanding your risk of pancreatic cancer. So that's now part of the guidelines on how to treat pancreatic cancer patients. So there's a lot more people now and coming in the future that are going to be much more aware of their risk, and they're going to know to be looking much more closely for the signs and symptoms of pancreatic cancer, and for getting some of these new tests that I think are on the horizon. And the other thing that I'm excited about is recognizing that new onset diabetes, getting an increase in blood sugar unexpectedly, didn't have diabetes before, now have an increase in blood sugar, that's a risk factor. Now, it's still, the incidence is not real high within that group, but if we can look at those individuals that just are over the age of 50 and their blood sugar just recently rose, that is an enriched population. So that does two things for us. One, it helps alert those people that that for the next 3 years, they should be looking for signs and symptoms, and they should be enrolling in studies like ones that PanCAN is just getting started to look at, so that we can really validate some of those blood-based markers. So it's important for the individual to know they're at an increased risk, but it's also important that in a research side, we can use that population to look for those tests that can be then used across the population. So I think both on the identifying the populations at risk and having tests for them, putting those two together is the type of thing that's really going to get us much farther in the near future than we've been thus far.
Really, really exciting. So Dr. George, what about you?
Well, I think an area of emerging excitement for me is information that's coming out about the microbiome. The microbiome are the trillions of bacteria that live in harmony with us. They're inside our digestive tract, they're on our skin, they're basically in every nook and cranny, you name it, it's there. And these bacteria are really critical to helping our immune system stay active. They keep it constantly stimulated, they're giving it a good daily workout. The bacteria in our digestive system help us digest our food, sometimes importantly supplementing our nutrition with key micronutrients and amino acids that we ourselves have a hard time pulling out of food. They do it for us. And they also help us fend off severe infections. The good bacteria in us and on our bodies can be our bodyguards against bad bacteria. So it turns out that each of us individually has our own personal ideal microbiome signature, this characterized, highly personalized and well-balanced amount of and type of bacteria that's really in harmony with us and helps promote our health. And more evidence is suggesting now that if that individual person microbiome harmony is thrown out of balance, which can actually be pretty easily done if you take antibiotics, which kill some bacteria, or you have surgery and stress your body, dietary changes, different environment, illnesses, that can by itself affect our immune systems. We've taken away that daily workout for our immune system. And so evidence is emerging that restoring that harmony may be able to enhance the benefits of cancer treatment, particularly immunotherapies. And so one approach that I'm real excited about considering is that as we're working to activate our immune systems to fight pancreatic cancer, which I previously mentioned was a challenge, we also maybe need to consider taking the patient's microbiome into consideration. Because if we can determine whether it's in or out of harmony with our healthy state, if it's out of harmony, what can we do to restore that harmony? And does achieving that harmony unlock another level of activity that our immune systems need to really kick on the afterburners and engage better against the cancer on our behalf? So this is an incredibly interesting aspect of cancer treatment modulation that we're really only now scratching the surface of because of advancements in clinical research and new technologies that are being brought to bear.
Yeah, really, really fascinating. So Dr. Hindafar, how about you?
Yeah, I love the answers from Lynn and Tom. I'm really excited about supportive care medicine. I think it's a new frontier that's opening up and getting a lot of new researchers involved in it. Pancreas cancer causes so much pain, weight loss, muscle wasting, depression, difficulty sleeping. You can't do the things that you love to do with your family, hard to go to work. And we really have to get to the bottom of how is the tumor causing these problems and what can we do to stop it? And I'm really proud of the Precision Promise Consortium. We have a supportive care committee with so many great scientists and physicians who are really focused on this aspect of pancreas cancer care. I've never been involved in a clinical trial that has put this much focus and dedication onto how patients actually feel. We're able to give patients electronic devices like Fitbits. Outside of the trial, we're working on things like virtual reality. And hopefully we'll introduce that later. We're also optimizing patients' nutrition. As Tom was talking about, they're seeing dietitians. They're getting pancreatic enzymes. And actually on the study with the generous grant from AbbVie, we're able to get these for our patients, as part of the trial, so they don't have to go to the pharmacy and get it. And we're also looking at the science behind it, like how is this happening? Why is this happening? And we're really trying to get our minds together and fix it. And I think that, one of the important things in the future going forward is going to be, how do we get patients with pancreas cancer to feel like their old selves? What can we do? And how can we spread that to the community? How can every doctor all over the country, what can they do to help improve the way their patients feel?
Great. Well, thank you. I mean, there's so much, feels like so much hope and about what's really happening actually today and in the very near future. So thank you to all three of you. I think that was a really terrific discussion. And again, just showing just how much activity is going on in the pancreatic cancer clinical trial space and the optimism and hope for what lies ahead. So thank you. So let's now open it up to some of the questions that are coming in from our attendees. So Dr. George, we get this question a lot from patients. Why isn't my doctor open to clinical trials as a possible treatment option?
That's a good question. We struggle with that a little bit as well, in that clinical trials are complicated. They require having a commitment to additional staff, additional paperwork, additional resources that some practices and some centers are just not able to support. And so, our approach is that clinical trials may not necessarily be available everywhere, but there ought to at least be an opportunity to consider a clinical trial. And I think that's where the patient central resource can be really valuable. And clinical trials may not be right for everyone, but at least looking into it and knowing whether that is an option is very much every patient's right. And I would encourage folks to consider that, even if the circumstances don't ultimately allow for someone to participate in a clinical trial.
Great, thanks. So Dr. Hindafar, of course, you talked about targeted therapies and getting testing to find out if you have a mutation that might be actionable. So this person is asking, if there's no reportable alterations found in my tumor, what would be your next recommendation?
That's a really great question. Thanks, Julie. I mean, that's the most common thing that you're going to find is that, remember, only 25% of people will have an alteration. So it's more common not to. And in that case, it's always better to stick with the standard of care unless there's a clinical trial available. So if there's not an actionable alteration on your profile, that means then you stick with the standard therapies or clinical trials for your particular disease.
Great, Dr. George. So another sort of similar question, if a patient is on standard of care and it's working, should they stop it to go on a clinical trial?
That is a great question. That actually comes up pretty commonly, where we may start a standard treatment for a patient while we're waiting for the results of a molecular profiling test to come back, or we're in the process of retrieving that information. And lo and behold, there is a treatment option that's available through a clinical trial or something more precise. And I guess my perspective is that if you're currently riding a winning horse, there's no reason to get off that horse. But it's great to know what plan B needs to be. And so if you're currently in a situation where a patient's deriving benefit from a standard treatment and it's working, it's accomplishing what needs to be accomplished, then keep the clinical trial on the back burner for plan B or that targeted therapy for plan B. Because unfortunately, it probably will be needed.
Yep. So staying with this theme, Dr. Hindafar, if a patient decides they want to go on a clinical trial and their doctor is not offering one, does that mean that they do need to go see somebody else?
No, that's a great question. I think if your provider doesn't have a clinical trial option for you, they'd be happy to help you find a clinical trial option nearby. And definitely, you'd probably want to use some resources. You can either go through PanCAN, go through clinicaltrials.gov, ask your treating physician for help in this, get the information together, and then seek the advice of your physician saying, is this clinical trial seem like a reasonable option for me? And, and I think that's the way we usually do it. It's hard when a provider doesn't have a clinical trial for you to recommend clinical trials that he or she might not know about. So you might need to do some work on your own to identify those opportunities.
Great. And of course, our patient services program can help patients to identify trials that might be in their geographic region. So Len, a research question and a clinical question. Biopsies are so important, and they're used for the tissue from a biopsy can be used for research, but they're also used for very practical purposes now in determining if a targeted therapy might be right for a patient. And so this person is asking, why isn't the tissue from a biopsy routinely saved so that it can be profiled for targeted therapy?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it really is related to now that we understand better, and there is actually some data that molecular profiling can result in a benefit, a clinical benefit, that idea that you need to get molecular testing and you need to have enough tissue to do that, it needs to spread throughout the community. And it just hasn't, we're working, I think everybody here on this is working to spread that message, let everybody know that, yes, think about that up front. Think about that when you go to get that biopsy, that this is going to be part of what you're going to want to do with it. And it's a matter of really making sure that becomes standard throughout the whole community with everybody that sees pancreatic cancer patients.
Great. So Dr. George, I think this is the final question that we have time for. What research is being done in the area of diet and nutrition? You talked a little about the microbiome, but what more can be done here?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of questions that are arising about what impact the microbiome has on the immune health. I think there's also questions being asked about how is it impacting digestion and the ability to maintain healthy calories and nutritional intake. So many patients with pancreatic cancer suffer, unfortunately, from digestive enzyme loss. Their pancreas is not making enough digestive juices, so those juices are critical to be able to digest the food and derive all the calories from it that you need. So weight loss and fatigue from the cancer is in large part also related to not absorbing nutrition appropriately. So there's a whole spectrum of research projects ongoing to make sure that we're tailoring the right amount of digestive enzymes to give patients, making sure they're not missing out on essential components of their nutrition, and how that impacts also on the microbiome or vice versa.
Great. So there were really a lot of terrific questions that came in from our audience. I know we didn't get to all of them, but with someone from PanCAN, we'll follow up with you to answer your questions individually if we weren't able to answer them today during this event. Thank you again to our amazing panel, really terrific discussion. And I hope that everyone out there will continue to spread the word during the rest of November and of course beyond. If you haven't heard yet, I'm really thrilled to share that Mindy Kaling is our brand ambassador for Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Month. And she recorded a brand new PSA for us that I want to share with you today.
You guys ready?
Hi, I'm Mindy Kaling. When I was growing up, my mom was always there for me. We shared everything together. So when I found out that she'd been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, it was one of the toughest moments of my life. We did everything we could for her, but we just hadn't caught it in time. Before she died, I asked her to give me as much advice as she could. The most important thing she told me was to always be my own best friend. And that's why I'm standing here today, with my mom in spirit, to continue her fight by advocating and supporting research that advances early detection and treatments for pancreatic cancer patients and their families. Because when we do that, we give those fighting today a chance at a life that my mom didn't have, something that she would be so incredibly proud of. Join me in supporting PanCAN. Donate now at pancan.org.
So we're really just so lucky to have someone like Mindy as an ambassador for us, telling her very personal story about her mom. You can join our fight during the month of November by going to pancan.org and finding out what other actions you can take. And of course, you can also make a donation during the month of November. I also want to make you aware of our next webinar, which is planned for January during Pancreatic Cancer Clinical Trials Awareness Month. And the topic of that webinar will also be about treatment and clinical trials. Since we had so many questions today, I think this is a popular topic, and we'll continue to talk about what is available to patients. And finally, I just want to reinforce that our Patient Central program is available to patients and families. We're ready to take your calls and your emails Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. Pacific time to 5 p.m. Pacific time. Please call one of our case managers. We'll get back to you and can provide you with individualized information about your situation. Thank you again for joining us today. We can't do any of this without you. I hope that you and your families have a happy Thanksgiving, and please stay safe.